Hi, welcome back. It's Watchful Studio, and what I've got for you today is a short review of Camel Up Cards. It's from 2016. It's not a new game by any means, but it is one that gets played quite often at the club, and I felt it was worth a short review here. I'll do a quick explanation of the rules later on, and although we're not really trying to teach the game here, the rules are fairly simple, so it might be enough to get you playing. Okay, it's Camel Up, not Camel Cup. It's designed by Stefan Bogen, and the artist was Dennis Lohausen, originally published in 2014 by Eggertspiel. It's for 2 to 6 players, but it's best around 4, and it's a betting game based on a camel race. There are several rounds, and these are race legs in which the camels race around the track, and players alternately will take a bet and then move the camels around the track. And the game ends when the camel crosses the finish line, and when it ends, and in all the intervening rounds, all the bets are settled by the bank, and the bank pays out if you got it right, or you pay a penalty if you got it wrong. So if you like, the payment for the bet is deferred. And then when those final bets are settled, the winner is the player with the most money, so it's pretty simple. There are 3 versions of this game now. The others are board games, and the rules are essentially similar, slight changes from game to game over the years. This is really a board game at heart, but it's using cards laid out to make the board, as you can see. And while the other games use dice to move the camels, this one's using cards instead. What's the game like? Well, the rules are simple, but the game is highly variable, and making decisions about the race deck and taking bets is complex, but it never feels heavy. This is a game that feels light, it's very, very social, and there's a lot more to it than is immediately obvious. It's highly interactive, but it's not confrontational, and it never feels aggressive, and I think that's an important aspect of why the game has such broad appeal. To whom does it appeal? Well, I've been playing it regularly for several years, and because it's so easy to carry around, I've been playing this version a great deal in the last year. I think I can say with a lot of confidence this is a very good game for different player personalities, and it's particularly good in multilingual situations, which is what I'm in, because the rules are very simple and there's no language dependency at all. Okay, I'm going to talk about the components, and then I can talk about the rules in a moment. First of all, we have 12 racetrack cards with a start and finish line, and each of the cards represents 2 spaces on the track, unless it's sandstorm, in which case it represents 1. Okay, we've got 5 wooden camels in these 5 colours, and we've got a palm tree and a Fennec wooden models. Then we have got 30 race cards, so these are used to move the camels around instead of dice, and we assemble them into a deck. We've got this very large selection of betting slips here. We've got bets for race leaders in each of the colours. We've got midfield bets for each of the colours, and we've got final winner and final loser cards in each of the 5 colours. So there's a lot of these betting cards. Then we've got these totally bonkers cards with which you're supposed to track your money, and these only slightly less bonkers high denomination cards. I know, right? What can you say? I usually reserve my opinions for the end of the video, but I can't help saying this now. Do not attempt to play the game with these cards. Finally, there are cards that attempt to explain, without words, how to assemble the race deck. They're a little complex, but it doesn't really matter how you assemble the race deck as long as you get the numbers right, which is pretty clearly marked. Size. The big surprise with the game is that although it packs into this really, really tiny little box here, it takes up at least as much space on the table as the board game version. So using the Watchwolf game system, we will measure it using a standard box, and I claim that a standard box is 1 foot by 1 foot, or 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres. As you can see, it's taking up 4 boxes on the table. Yeah, let's talk about the rules. It's going to be pretty high level, but it should give you an idea of how the game's played, and the game's pretty robust, so it doesn't really matter if you get stuff wrong. Depending on player count, the racetrack will be shorter or longer, and that will move the finish lines forward and backwards. So here's an example. If you've got 4 players, your racetrack needs to be 17 long, and if you've got 6 players, your racetrack needs to be 19 long, and you'll use these extra cards wherever I put them. And the camels are moved by a race deck, and I'll come to that in a minute, but they usually move 1 or 2 spaces each. And when their movement stops, if there are other camels there, then they stack on top of one another. So this is the central feature of the game. It's quirky and amusing, but it also makes the betting very interesting indeed. So if the blue camel is moved by the race deck 1 space, it stacks on top of the orange camel. Then, if the orange camel were to be moved, it would stack on top of the white. So then, let's suppose the orange camel were moved again by the deck, it would move off the white, and if the white moved, it would stack on top of the blue, like that. Now when the camels move backwards, they do the same thing, but they stack at the bottom. So if the green camel were to be moved backwards, which I'll cover in a minute, it goes back here, but it goes at the bottom of that stack. Then imagine that the blue stack moves forward, let's say the white moves forward, orange moves forward. Let's suppose that the blue now moves back 1 space. It goes to the bottom of that stack like that. And then when the leg or the race ends, the finishing position of the camels is counted from front to back and from top to bottom. So in this case, white's in first, green second, orange third, blue fourth, and yellow is in 5th place. So that gives a little bit of context about how the race runs, and now we can look at the betting part of the game. The betting slips just represent the position of the camels at the end of the race, and they pay out if you win the bet or if you come close. You don't have to pay to make the bet, but you do pay a penalty if you lose, which provides the betting odds. So let's take an example. If I choose this betting slip, I'm betting that the orange camel will win in 1st place, and if it does, I'll win 5, and if it's in 2nd place, I'll win 1, but if it's in 3rd, 4th or 5th, I will get -1, and all of the betting slips follow that basic structure. And then we've got the finishing position, so when the race is ended, if the yellow camel finished 1st, you'll get 7. If it's 2nd, you'll get 3rd. And if it's 3rd, 4th or 5th, you get -1. And there's one of those in each colours. And there's also one for betting whether the camel finished last. So there's a lot of these betting slips. That's a big part of the game. Let's do a quick example here. Imagine that over the course of the leg, I've taken these betting slips, and that this is the finishing position of the camels at the end of the leg. The orange camel is not in 1st or 2nd, -1. The white is in 1st position, so I get 5 for that. Blue, look down there at 4th, that's another -1. But orange is in 3rd, no good, -1. Yellow, no good, -1. Green, it is in 2nd place. I wanted to get 3, but I'm only going to get 1. So I gained 5 plus 1 is 6 points, and -1, 2, 3, 4. So my winnings for that leg were 2 overall. So I've covered the camel movement rules and the betting slip rules. Let's just look at how we move the camels. Unlike the board games that use special dice that you drop out of a giant cardboard pyramid, in this version we move the camels using cards from the race deck, and when the deck is used up, that leg will be over, and a new race deck will be assembled. Setting up the deck is a bit fiddly, and I'm not going to describe it here, but in essence we're going to end up with about half the deck to move them, and players are going to choose from cards they're dealt to go into the deck. The leg will last as long until the last card is drawn. And when the card is drawn, the corresponding camel is moved the distance using the movement rules. Here again, it's like yellow camel's moving 1, blue camel's moving 1. You get the idea. White's moving 1. This is a good one. Let's just talk about the Fennec and the palm tree. These are modifiers for the camels. If you pay 1, instead of moving the camels, you may place the fennec or the palm tree, and the fennec will scare the camels to make them move backwards, and the palm tree will move the camel forward. So let me just look at that. So if we imagine that the white camel had been moved one and it hits the palm tree, it moves one forward, and then the palm tree is returned to its spot there on the card. And if the white camel encountered the fennec, which we did earlier, I didn't explain how the camels might move backwards, and how they might move backwards is if they encounter the desert fox. So if the desert fox had been placed here and the white camel moved forward one, then it would go backwards one and end up under the blue camel in that case. Players start with a little bit of money. There's no such thing as minus numbers. If you run out of money and you can't pay the bank for the bet that you took, you don't go negative. And the play proceeds through these rounds with players alternately taking a bet and then moving the camels using the race deck as we've shown. And then the cards run out from the race deck, the bets are settled, and then all of the bets and all of the race cards go back together. We assemble a new race deck and we start again taking bets and moving the camels or placing the obstructions. So my opinions about the game. Well, in the first place, we're using the race deck cards, as I've described, instead of dice in the other games, and this adds a really strategic dimension. It's a much less random than the original board game. You're choosing which cards from your hand to go into the race deck, so you have some knowledge of what the camels are going to do, but your knowledge is incomplete. It can get genuinely deep, but as I said at the start, it never feels heavy. It always stays light, it's always entertaining, and it's very, very sociable. The system for setting up the race deck is really difficult, and we just house rule it. As long as you've got the right number of cards in the race deck for the number of players which is marked on these cards, it doesn't really matter how you do it, as long as everybody's doing the same thing. Now the sandstorm mechanism is really, really good. This would be, if we imagine that this were the situation at the end of a leg, if there's a whole card, 2 spaces, between the camels, then the card flips. And what that means is that these cards now have less distance to travel, and so they will tend to catch up the race leaders. It's really, really good. It keeps the game interesting, and it keeps everything variable, and there aren't any predictable outcomes too early in the game. I have to say, I think the sandstorm metaphor's a little bit wacky. I think that camels just sit down in sandstorms, don't they, and use their long eyelashes, or perhaps that's just the North African camel racing scene that I'm familiar with. Now, as far as the betting slips, there are too many bloody cards in this game. It's a mess, and nobody knows where to find what they want or what the situation is. I really dislike it. Finally, the box is really, really tiny, and it's small, and you can throw it in your backpack on a day when you might end up in a social situation. You know, you could take it on a picnic, or if you take it to the pub, if you can find room to play it at a pub, and it's a really, really great opportunistic game. I didn't mention cost earlier, but the cost of the game is about $25. Paid maybe less than that for this one, and I've really had my money's worth out of it. It's just such a good game for all kinds of different people. I really, really like it. Highly recommended. So there we have it, Camel Up Cards. What I really, really like about this game is that it's a board game where you have to think about what you're doing on every turn. At every move you have to think about it, but it's very, very sociable, and it brings people together like a party game. So I could play this with my whole family, including elderly relatives, but we'd all have a lot of fun together, and as a regular board gamer, I wouldn't be bored. It's always interesting. That's all from Watchful Studio today. Please join us again. Bye-bye. Then the way that the game wants you to count money is using these